Hello YouTubers, this is Ranger Rick and we're going to look at disassembling the slide on PT111 Pro. And got the slide out. Some of the pieces we'll need to do this will be a hammer, some roll pin punches, a small screwdriver, a pair of pliers. I've got a magnetic parts tray. This thing's terrific for hanging on to parts, and a block to help when we drive the pins out. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is on the rear end of the slide, there's a plastic cover that covers the firing pin spring. We're going to take a small screwdriver and we're going to go underneath this plastic part and just kind of pry it up just a little bit and pop it past the end of that clip that's there. And once we get that done, we're just going to push it on out. So that little plastic part comes out pretty easily. It's just there as a dust cover, really. I'll set that in our tray. Next thing we're going to do is take the metal clip that holds the firing pin spring in place, and we're going to take the clip out. And the easiest way to do this is just to take a roll pin punch and push down on that green part, which is a spring, push it down through the clip, and then move the clip forward once you've done that. You can see how I've got the clip kind of moved forward, but the spring's kind of holding it in place. Once you do that, you want to cover the rest of it with your finger and slide that clip the rest of the way out. Okay, so that clip comes out. It is concave on one side and convex on the other, and you'll see when you take a look at it which way it goes, but it's real kind of pretty obvious. But we'll go ahead and put that in our parts. As we take the spring out, one of the things we want to do, this little metal catch that's up here, this is actually part of the firing pin, but the main thing we want to keep an eye on is this spring that's behind it. So what I usually do is move the spring out using this as kind of a lever for it. You can see how when I push that up and down, it kind of moves that spring assembly on out. And sometimes you have to wiggle the green part around to get it to line up with the hole when it comes out. You can see how I'm doing that. So just bring that up a little bit to where you can get the spring assembly out. It comes out. It does not come apart any further than that. At this point, you can hold the spring that's on the guide here and go ahead and pull the firing pin all the way out. And that's out. And we'll set that in our parts tray. And then the last thing I want to do is get this spring that's on this guide. I don't know if you can see that real well, but it's a little tiny spring, and you just want to make sure you keep up with that. One of the reasons I do assembly and disassembly on a towel like this is it keeps things from rolling around, ball bearings, little springs and stuff that fall out of the gun. And boy, it's really a good idea to have that as a basis in addition to keeping from marring the firing arm up. So that's the little spring, and we'll just put it in our tray also. Okay, so we've got the firing pin out, and that's assembly and that's spring. Now the next thing the other thing we're gonna do is take out the ejector and also the firing pin safety. Now, the firing pin safety is this little silver part that's spring-loaded right here. When the gun slides back and forth, this actually pushes up, and that releases the firing pin to be able to come forward and strike the cartridge. So that is spring-loaded, so that's one spring that we need to keep up with. The ejector, when we take it out, has a spring right here on the back, and then the little indicator that swings out when there's a you probably can see that, but when there's a cartridge round loaded, this little indicator comes out, and it's also got a little tiny spring in it too. So each of those three things has a spring, and we're going to keep up with each of those as we take this apart. So what we want to do is right beside the firing pin safety is the punch, and that's the top of it here. That's the punch we want to take out. So we're just going to take a hole punch here. I just have a block of wood with some holes in it because I don't want to spend the money to buy one of those really nice plastic ones. And I'm just going to line that pin up, and I'm going to go ahead and drive it out a little bit so you can see it. And make sure that you hang on to the to this firing pin safety and the ejector as you do this. Okay, so I've got my finger on both and on the ejector, and you can see the pin right here. So I'm going to pull the pin out, and there's our pin. Alright, once that's out, there's two things that's going to come out. The ejector will come out, so we're going to go ahead and lift the ejector and its assembly out. Okay, when you do that, you have to slide it forward towards the front of the slide, and then you can lift it out. Okay, so we'll just set that down for a second while we take out the other piece here. The other piece is this firing pin safety, and you can just tip it over and let it fall out, but I'm going to grab it here with a pair of pliers so you can see me pull it out. So that's the little firing pin safety, and it goes down into the unit. And then there's also a spring that is used for that. We'll go ahead and use a little punch to go in and retrieve that spring. So those are the two pieces for that, the firing pin safety and its associated spring. Okay, so we want to keep those two together. And then the other part is the ejector, and the ejector looks like this when it's in the gun. The spring is here, and there's the ejector. So go ahead and set the spring out. Then you can see on the ejector and the indicator here, and this little tiny spring that's holding that indicator in place. So we're going to separate the indicator, and we're also going to pull out that little tiny spring. And I just pulled it out with a pair of pliers just so you could kind of see where it came from. Okay, so those are the three pieces. The ejector itself, that little tiny spring, and we're going to all set those in the tray over here so we don't lose them. Of course, the ejector is this part right here. This is the ejector part on this edge that actually helps pull the cartridge out of the gun after it's been fired. Okay, so at that point everything's out of the slide except the locking safety, and I don't take that out because it's been pinned in place. And I don't really use mine anyway, but I'm not going to attempt to take that out just simply because the pin has been punched and put in place like that. So that's the slide totally disassembled. Okay, let's put this back together. We'll start out by taking kind of reverse order what we did earlier. We're going to start by putting in this little safety, firing pin safety, and the part that comes up. So I'm going to take the spring for it and go ahead and drop it down the hole, and it does have a place that it resides in the very bottom of it. And you can look through the ejector port and also see that. And then this piece just drops in with the tallest part of it facing the outside rail there. And when you do this, you can look through the ejector space here and kind of see that it's dropped down into place correctly. So we got that in place. Next thing we'll do is assemble the ejector and cartridge indicator. So we've got those three pieces with this little tiny spring. So I'm just going to drop that spring down in that little detent where it goes. Kind of the downside to having a magnetized things is that it tends to move these little springs around. So you can see that spring's in place, hopefully. And then the indicator has a little hollowed out place where the spring connects to. So basically we're just going to take and slide that in there, and then the rest of that will lock down in place. And once it's in place, that spring's not going to go anywhere. So that's the assembled piece, and you want to just kind of hang on to it that way. Okay, so now we're going to hold the firing pin safety down into the firearm, and while we do that, we're going to put the ejector in position. The one other thing that we've got to do as far as the ejector is concerned is that put the spring that goes here, we're going to go ahead and set it in the firearm and get it oriented the correct way so it's up and down. So you can see that. And then we're just going to put the ejector in place. And as we do this, we're going to move it forward quite a bit. I didn't quite get the spring in place, but we'll push that back up under there. You see how it's got to come way forward to get around this lip, and then we're going to slide it back in place. So we've done those two things. We've held the safety down, and then we slid that back in place, and then I can push the back of the ejector and feel that spring there, so I know I've got it in there correctly. At this point, I can look down through the hole and see the ejector when it's pushed over, and cleanly the hole's all the way through. So I'm just going to hold that all in place, put the pin in place, and rock that around a little bit, tap it just a little bit, and that's good. It's holding it in place, and everything looks good there. So at this point we can just go ahead and tap it the rest of the way in. So we'll get a roll punch here, get it lined up. And that's lined up and looks good. We got it in place. Ejector looks good. And spring safety moves. So we're in good shape there. Last step we're going to do is take and put the firing pin and its associated spring and cover in place. So we've got this little tiny spring, remember, that was on the guide rod here. So I'm just going to use a pair of pliers to grab a hold of that spring and to put it on the guide rod. And once it's on the guide rod, I'll just push it all the way forward. And then we've got the actual firing pin unit, and we're going to slide that in place till the tab comes forward here. And sometimes you've got the easiest way is just take a roll pin or something and move the firing pin around until it slides down on that guide rod. So now that's in place. And then finally we've got a spring assembly, so we'll drop that down in place. And then we've got the little metal clip that holds it all together. And there's only one way that can go in. I'm just going to put that in by hand in place there. I'm going to hold it with my thumb, and then I'm going to drive the spring downward past the clip. And at that point, I can just push the clip in place. So you can see I've got it about half of the way in there, and I can push it in with my thumb. And then you can keep pushing the spring in and the clip until it pops up through the clip, and that's what holds it all in. And then finally we've got a little plastic cover that goes on top of that. So we'll slide that cover in place and make sure it clips down on the end there. So that's it for this video. In future videos we'll look at fully disassembling the lower section of the firearm. And until then, be safe and shoot straight.